Steroids promise quick muscle, quick strength, and what feels like instant confidence. But the dark truth, they're silently destroying thousands of lives of young and old people every year, male and female. In this video, I'm going to break down the real science of anabolic steroids and their abuse, and how it may wreck your health, it may wreck your hormones, and it may even wreck your future. So in this video, we'll look at the difference between steroid abuse and medically supervised hormone replacement therapy like TRT. We'll look at the real dangers to your organs and fertility, and look at alternative paths that actually lead to long-term performance and vitality. I'll even cover physician-prescribed DHT analog compounds that you may have heard of, and explain whether they truly belong alongside a safe hormone plan. And we'll talk about the most infamous steroid of them all, Tren, or Trenbolone, the so-called heroin of the steroid world, and why you may want to steer clear of this one. So stick around. You may be able to help someone that you care about who is struggling or dealing with or even considering using steroids. And you'll hear today what could possibly save their health and maybe even their life. So what are steroids really? When most people say steroids, what they really mean are anabolic or androgenic steroids, or AAS. These are synthetic versions of testosterone designed to increase muscle growth, strength, and recovery. Now, there's an important distinction we need to make right from the start. Steroid abuse is when men take massive, supraphysiological doses far beyond what the body could ever produce to pack on muscle or enhance performance. TRT, or testosterone replacement therapy, or testosterone therapy, is completely different. It's physician and doctor guided. It's about restoring normal, healthy hormone levels when someone is clinically deficient or low. And this matters because while abuse wrecks lives, medically supervised therapy can restore them. For perspective, studies estimate that over 1 million Americans have misused anabolic steroids at some point. And here's the kicker. Most of them aren't even pro athletes. They're regular men chasing aesthetics, a certain look in the mirror. But the cost of that shortcut, it may be way higher than they realize. So what are the hidden dangers of steroid abuse? Let's talk about what really happens when you abuse steroids. You can get potential organ stress and heart disease. I've never really loved to use the word steroid abuse. I find that it's a little bit condescending, but also a little bit off kilter, because what one person may consider a therapeutic dose, someone else could take those blood levels, especially if they were measured at the time of your peak, basically shortly after you did the injection, and say, oh, you're abusing steroids. So I never really like that term full stop, but we have to have a caveat to that, because it's all about when and how you're doing it. And in this video, as we refer to steroid abuse, we're referring to people who are getting their steroids from the gym for that, either that muscular look, which, look, let's face it, everyone, and especially males today, are pressured into feeling that they need to look their very best. The use of these steroids can lead to really bad outcomes for some men, especially when it's not being supervised, that men are going to their gyms or to other coaches or people that think they know what they're talking about. And many times they don't, or the testosterone that they are getting is not from a legitimate medical source, and it's made in someone's bathtub or something like that. So there are lots of men that are risking their health because, not just because of if they were getting the real anabolic steroids, but even if they were, they might be tainted with, bacteria that would cause sepsis, or would be tainted with heavy metals, or just a very low grade, either higher dose than they expected or lower dose than they expected. So all of these things can contribute to organ stress and potentially heart disease. Steroids, yes, they can thicken the blood. And this is the one where people will say, well, TRT can thicken the blood as well. But the degree in which some of the steroids can do, especially when they're stacked, may lead to even thicker blood than you would normally get on just a testosterone replacement therapy dose. Not to mention, if you're not being supervised by a doctor, if your blood thickens too much, too quickly, compared to maybe your mate that might be doing the same thing, it may be because you might have sleep apnea, which you weren't aware of. So again, another reason is to see a doctor if you are having issues with your testosterone, but also why you shouldn't just pick up the needle from the gym buddy and try steroids. So Another reason why steroids may hurt the heart is, well, they can raise your bad cholesterol or lower your good cholesterol overall. That's part of the equation, though. There will be some who do keto that will say that the cholesterol doesn't really matter as long as I'm really lean, but there are studies that show it does. In fact, in 2017 there was a study that found that long-term steroid users had nearly 3 times the risk of early heart disease, especially coronary artery disease, and there are countless cases and reports of young men under 35 dropping dead from heart attacks whilst looking really good, like Greek gods. Now, of course, again, because I hate when there's the scare tactics that are in the media. They're constantly, throwing this out there. And I think we have to be nuanced with how we approach the discussion around this, because young people are very much pressurized, as are middle-aged men, pressurized to look and feel good a certain way. And what we're trying to say in the video is that unsupervised steroid use is really, really potentially harmful and is not the same thing as testosterone replacement therapy. One of the other issues that may affect the heart is, not to mention, you can get the left ventricular hypertrophy, so your heart may get stretched out and not pump as efficiently, because some of these anabolic steroids may increase your blood pressure to a really high amount, higher than should be, maybe due to some water retention. And there's a whole combination of things that will happen that really isn't good for your overall health. And if you broke it down to almost on the cellular level, you might be increasing oxidative stress, which stresses your mitochondria. So whilst testosterone replacement therapy, a form of testosterone, may improve your overall health, wellness, your heart health, etc., when you're using massive doses and for a very long time and unsupervised and unmonitored and unchecked, you don't know what the long-term damage is, but overall we do know from studies that it's not necessarily very, very good long-term, having those really, really super physiological levels of testosterone on the health. Now, whilst a younger person may, in the short term, be able to tolerate this better, I think in the long term, there may be certain other negative effects. Now, one of them that goes hand in hand with really any sort of exogenous hormones is what happens to your fertility and the collapse of your hormonal axis. And more so is when you use synthetic anabolic steroids, because when you're using synthetic anabolic steroids, you're not getting the actual testosterone. So some young men will say, well, I'm not going to use the testosterone as the base of my so-called course or cycle. I'll just be doing the nandrolone, or I'll be doing some other anabolic steroid on its own, similar to SARMs, selective androgen receptor modulators. And what they don't realize is they're not getting that full cocktail of hormones. As I've always said on this channel, you get 3 hormones for the price of 1 with testosterone, but with other anabolic steroids, you're not getting the actual metabolites like estradiol in the right combination or dihydrotestosterone. In fact, you're getting variations of metabolites for those particular substances. For instance, nandrolone has its own version of almost like an estrogen, almost its own version of a DHT, but they don't hit the receptor in the same way. And again, your body doesn't really operate as efficiently and as healthily as it could, where if you just had testosterone levels that were increased over baseline. So that's the issue with synthetic anabolic steroids. And then also, just like if, obviously if you're on TRT, you would shut down eventually your pituitary axis. I think this will be a bit more acute, and you will shut down your pituitary axis, your natural production. So that's not great, again, because you're shutting down your natural production, and then you're not getting the benefit of having your natural estradiol at the optimal range, or your dihydrotestosterone, which will throw off your general health and well-being. Not to mention your fertility is pretty much going to be gone, and it may be gone a bit quicker with the anabolic steroids compared to testosterone. Another potential side effect is your liver or kidney damage, and this is especially true if you're using oral steroids, which can be toxic to the liver. And we don't mean oral as in the lymphatic oral. So there are newer medications like Kaisertrex, which is a testosterone oral. There also are some other orals that we'll talk about that are DHT analog orals like Steroid, which are not liver toxic. But the traditional liver toxic steroids would be the oral Winstrol or the oral Dianabol, or there's the oral methyl testosterone. These were some of the names of oral steroids in the past that would be toxic to your liver and could cause, when it goes to a very severe state, jaundice, like a yellowing of your skin, or tumors within your liver, and definitely kidney stress. So, doctors are seeing men in their 20s with organ profiles that look like someone in like twice or more than their age. And the issue with that is, if you're a young person, you should be wanting, you want to maintain a healthy outside body, but you also want to have healthy internal organs in your body. And I think sometimes the steroids can cause these issues, which is why natural TRT is really a better approach if you're deficient. And I've got a theory, before we go on to the next point, of why some young people, or any man tends to go on these anabolic steroids is because they're probably already low or deficient in testosterone to begin with. And unfortunately, a mate at the gym or someone that's, I guess, a coach will give them, and they'll take what they can get because they won't have the full selection of options. And what they do get will not be medical or pharmaceutical grade, usually. And as a result, we have seen men who have used anabolic steroids from their gym mates or an underground source or from wherever they got it from. And they would claim they only use injections, and yet we would still see derangements in their liver enzymes and kidney function. So that tells us that there's potentially some toxic metals in the substance, or some other contaminants that they weren't aware of, which may be driving this somewhat disease state or derangement in their biomarkers in their liver and their kidneys. So it's really not worth the risk when you really don't know where it's coming from, that it's not been gone through the proper licensing through the FDA or the MHRA or European Medicines Agency. So you're really at risk, especially when you're not under a doctor's supervision, help monitor your bloods and help guide you through. Unfortunate problem that happens when you take anabolic steroids is a psychological fallout that happens. So let's talk about your mind, not just the body, because the mind is very important. Now, there's a lot of talk about roid rage. Now, this is not necessarily the case that happens with TRT, and the roid rage or the behavior. I'm not sure if it's completely down to the androgen-like substance, but when you're moving out of the testosterone, the natural biological testosterone, which has been shown to have more calming effect, and then you're moving more into the anabolic steroid range, which may be hitting receptors in another way, may be driving dopamine or creating some sort of unbalanced chemical cocktail in your brain. This may lead to an aggression that is not what testosterone would do for people, or could be this slightly increased level, make someone a little bit short-fused. So there have been some studies that link steroid abuse to increased aggression, mood swings, and even violent behavior. This could be almost more down to the testosterone not being optimized, and that it's hard to know exactly what happens. It could also be due to when your cycle ends, your testosterone levels plummet, and now you've got low T issues and all the symptoms that come along with it, like depression, anxiety, even potential for suicide. These are real mental issues that can affect men who have abused anabolic steroids, because when you've been sitting really high, having the androgen receptor agonized or the androgen receptor activated, and then when you don't have that, you will have a drop in mood. So it's really important to recognize that and, seek treatment so that you don't end up in the downward spiral of mental health. So let me give you an example of a real world young person, around the mid-20s. He gained over 40 pounds of muscle in a year. Online, he looked like he was winning, on Instagram and TikTok, had the wonderful body, very lean. Behind the scenes, his liver was failing, his hormones were permanently disrupted. He's now on lifelong medical therapy just to feel baseline human again. Usually that medical therapy is testosterone replacement, but it's a young man that may not have needed to have testosterone replacement is now using testosterone for the rest of his life. So there is a dark trade-off. You might get the muscles, but it's also short-term. And when you go off the treatment, like this young man did, the muscles decline, they shrink. And you risk losing your mind or your mental health. You can risk your heart, and you can risk your fertility, and it's potentially risking your future. So ideally, it's not worth starting down the anabolic steroid route. So there's a particular type of steroid, Tren or Trenbolone, and this steroid has been basically derived from, I think, an old drug called parabolin. It was a French licensed medication, I think up until the late 1980s. Even when parabolan was a licensed drug, it has this Trenbolone molecule in it. It was known to cause some damage to the kidneys, and it's very potent, this particular steroid. I believe it's derived from progesterone. It's kind of like a cousin of nandrolone. And this particular steroid is the heroin of steroids when it comes to steroids. Why? Because some men find it very, very addictive and very difficult when they stop to have other androgens, including their own, or even sometimes testosterone therapy, replace how they feel. And it can take a long time to get readjusted. So people who do play with Trenbolone, certain people it may be like, throwing like gasoline on a fire, or it's just something that you wouldn't really want to do. And I'll tell you why. It does seem to give people the appearance of having, very full muscles, but along with it comes lots of androgens and lots of acne. In many cases, it binds very, very strongly to the androgen receptor in the muscle tissue and in the brain, and with incredibly high affinity. And the stronger the binding, the stronger the signal. And on paper, Tren would look like it's going to do amazing things for muscle growth, but in reality, it can be a nightmare for some because, they just can't. Sometimes men on Tren can't sleep. Some will describe short term. They have, incredible libidos, only for later on for it either to affect their erectile function. So they have a great libido, but they don't have good erections, or then the libido tanks, possibly due to Tren increasing prolactin. So men who use Tren will have somewhat of an addictive property to it. They do tend to have further aggression and intensity and drive, but the anxiety, some paranoia, and some uncontrollable moods and mood swings do and can happen in some men, and it's quite unfortunate. And we have seen some men that had tried that in their stack and had a really hard time adapting when they came off of it. Eventually they did, and it took time, and many of them have to be on TRT for life as the natural testosterone shut down and never really recovers and almost becomes desensitized. So that's probably one to avoid if you don't want to have long-term side effects. Now, everyone is individual. Some people don't have such a serious withdrawal type of effect, but it can be quite brutal if you are one of the people who it affects it in that way. And we're all very, very different. So hopefully you stay away from that one. But, there is hope. There is hope if you, even the worst cases of those who have used the different anabolic steroids, testosterone therapy, replacement therapy, essentially, whilst it has to be, well, it doesn't have to be for life, but in this case, if you damage your pituitary axis and your ability to function, without androgens, and testosterone replacement therapy can get you back to a kind of a normal baseline, maybe even some better than baseline. But, it's a continuous process. You continuously need to be on testosterone, most likely for the rest of your life, because that's kind of how it works out. But by restoring your normal physiological testosterone levels, you can gradually reclaim your libido, your energy, your mood without the toxicity of these very damaging anabolic steroids. So the TRT won't necessarily erase or replace all that past damage, but it would be able to stabilize your future. So if you or someone you know has been trapped in that Tren cycle, there are safer medical paths forward. You don't have to stay chained to the Tren, which is one of the most, I think, destructive steroids on the planet. So let's talk about some safer alternatives. Now, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about testosterone replacement therapy, which is not for bodybuilding, which is not about blasting and cruising and blasting your system with 10 times what's natural. It's about restoring testosterone to the normal physiological range. And that range is really, I think, the ranges as they were set up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, not the ranges that have all shifted downward and pushing everyone into really hypergonadal level as would be seen in the 1990s, right? We're talking about optimal, healthy, physiological ranges, not something that's going to be so off the charts that's going to put damage to your heart, to your blood pressure, and to your other organs. So when testosterone is prescribed correctly, it will bring back your energy, your focus, and your drive. Obviously, you've got to do the work as well, being a good diet, exercise, sleep, but also can restore your sexual health. It can help support your muscles, your bone density, and with the right adjunct therapies like HCG or HMG, can even help restore or preserve your fertility. The key difference, though, is we help monitor you when you're on testosterone replacement therapy so that you can make sure you're getting your bloods done correctly and that we can track the progress of your organs. Adjustments I've made based on blood tests and not how big your arms look in the mirror. Though when you're on TRT and if your arms and your muscles are improving, that's still a very good sign because having healthy muscle mass is important for long-term health. It's just that there can be extremes, and that's what we're talking about here. Not the extremes of outcome, because some people will be more responders to whether it's androgens or testosterone or anabolic steroids. What we're talking about is the outright abuse where you're putting your health at risk. Some of you have heard about DHT-based compounds, and in fact, some anabolic steroids are based on DHT-based compounds. Now, DHT is a rare treatment in some cases for young men or young boys who have micropenis, or for those who have a condition where their androgen, they don't convert, they don't have the 5-alpha reductase enzyme, and so then they have lots of testosterone, but they don't convert into dihydrotestosterone. And so in those cases, doctors do and can prescribe DHT or DHT analogs, such as Steroid has been licensed, so has drostanolone, but it's no longer really available anywhere commercially. There are topical DHT gels that are probably the most commonly available DHT analogs, or, like I said, Steroid in some countries in Europe have been shown to improve things like anxiety. One study from Steroid showed that it may help slightly increase FSH. The Steroid may offset some of the effects of overabundance of estradiol, but usually these aren't always needed. Some men feel slightly better on Steroid or DHT analog. And one of the benefits of the testosterone scrotal cream is you do get natural dihydrotestosterone that your own body converts your testosterone to DHT through the scrotal skin. But these aren't typically the drugs that are abused. They're closer, the DHT analogs I'm referring to are closer to what your own body naturally makes. And here's an interesting piece of history. And back in the 1970s, some of the researchers found that, for example, Steroid may actually reduce anxiety in some men and stabilize mood and support libido. And I think sometimes we can also see a bit of that with the neurosteroids, or in that case, DHEA may also have a similar effect. DHEA being it's a steroid-like molecule, but not steroids in the bad sense that we talked about earlier. It's made from your adrenal glands, and in the late 1990s, there was a talk of DHEA being somewhat of an anti-aging hormone, and that having more optimal levels, I think around 10 or 11, is a bit healthier than having really low levels overall. And some doctors will claim that having these neurosteroids like DHEA is very protective for the brain. That's hence the name neurosteroids, to protect the brain. So I can see why that 1970s study on even the DHT analog Steroid may have some healthy benefit when used under doctor supervision, prescribed by doctors. But it's becoming less and less available in Europe at this time, and it was never licensed in the USA. So there are some specific benefits, but the bottom line really is testosterone itself is the body's primary hormone, and it's so important because you have the benefits of the testosterone, the estradiol, and the DHT. Your DHT-based therapies sometimes can play a supportive role, especially if you have an issue with your 5-alpha reductase enzyme converting your testosterone to DHT, but most people don't really have that. So in other words, don't confuse the specialized tools with the main solution, which is testosterone therapy. So what can you do? Where does that leave you if you still need to have the muscle, the vitality, the energy without destroying your health? And I think you might be able to guess that there is a sustainable play, a sustainable plan, and that would be, train at the gym smartly, intelligently, progressive overload, resistance training, consistency, fundamentals still do work. And try to improve your recovery, because much of the recovery happens when you're in deep sleep. Sleep is anabolic. If you're getting enough proper deep sleep rest, you'll get growth, and you'll reduce stress, and you'll improve your brain health. And then you have to monitor your health overall, looking at any symptoms of fatigue, low libido, poor recovery, and get tested if you have these symptoms. Because don't buy black market gym gear. You're going to put yourself at risk. Go to see a doctor, use medical advice, get treated with hormone therapies, by a legitimate doctor in TRT clinics who are there to help you optimize your health and try to extend and improve your quality of life. Here's the mindset shift that you should consider. Your health is worth more than your six-pack in your 20s. And I've seen too many young people chasing the short term. And I think as young people, we all have done it. But try to look to the longer term and find the right path that will sustain your health without long-term negative implications. So let's just want to summarize. Steroid abuse really can wreck your body, wreck your mind, damage your organs, damage your heart, decrease your fertility, make you infertile perhaps, and create mood disorders. Tren is a particularly nasty one, quite destructive when used, and can kind of hook men in really, really hard. At BMH, we don't see TRT as a shortcut. We don't see TRT as a doping agent. We see TRT as a long-term investment in your health, because in many ways, having the low testosterone for life is more dangerous for your health than having optimal testosterone levels. And it's really a scientifically proven and sustainable path forward. If you're serious about long-term vitality, check the links below. At BMH, we've got resources, we've got education, and we've got guidance to help you take a smarter path. And don't gamble with your health for a temporary gain at the gym. Build the foundation that lasts. I'm Mike with BMH. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Oh, and by the way, now you can listen to this podcast on Spotify as well.